Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story. Hello there. This is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We seek to transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same can happen to you. So when you listen to any of the Deal by Me podcast, please support this podcast with a donation or a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. What about a shout out to supporters of this podcast? Reverend Quincy Davis, Dr. Lynn Henderson, Kenneth and Donald McDuffie, Olivia Malbrough, Clinton and Johnette Cozart, and Leonard and Cynthia Meekins, and John McLaughlin. Check out my encouraging, inspiring, and transforming books. I'm available for speaking engagements, in-person and virtual seminars, so please contact me through my website, www.dealbyme.com. I have with me Roger S. Gotlief, who is a professor of philosophy. He has been exploring the religious, spiritual, and moral dimensions of the environmental crisis for 3 decades. He has asked what spiritual life can be like in the face of devastating climate change, ocean filling with plastic, and babies born with 100 toxic chemicals in their bloodstream. Oh, he has an awesome story and is very capable of sharing with us today. And I'm asking that you please give him all of the attention that you can give. And I know you're going to get some very valuable information from him. Um, Dr. Gottlief, it is so good to have you come and be a part of this podcast today. So I want to ask you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are being interviewed from.
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I appreciate your interest. I'm talking to you from my little study in the city of Boston. I'm a professor of philosophy at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which is a medium-sized city about 50 miles from Boston. For my day job, I'm professor of philosophy, and I do a fair amount of writing. I've written 9 books and edited 12. The current book is part of my turn to fiction. Some years ago, I wrote a collection of short stories, all environmentally themed, and it won a little fiction prize, and that gave me the encouragement, or as we might say, the chutzpah, to write a novel. And so the subject here is the novel, The Sacrifice Zone. The title is a word, a specific term. Sacrifice zone is an area so polluted that it can never be cleaned up. And the question that the novel raises is, in a sense, is our own, along with the planet, becoming a sacrifice zone? As the current Pope said, we're turning it into an immense pile of filth. That was Pope Francis. It not only is the planet a sacrifice zone, but what about our own hearts? Is it possible to actually face the truth, not hide in denial, not hide in avoidance, not distract? Modern society has a great capacity for distraction. But actually, if we look at what's happening with the climate, with the plastics in the ocean, with the toxins in our bloodstreams, if we actually look at this, is it possible not to succumb to despair, to rage, to endless grief in which what's left can't provoke any joy? So the novel asks, the major theme of the novel is, what would a person who is an environmental saint in a very broad sense, what would an environmental saint look like today? And one of the characters is that, and she has this relationship with it's a woman, and she has a relationship with this older man who's very committed to the environmental cause, and he is steeped in rage and despair. And he can't understand, how is it that she does the work? She's been an environmental activist for 20 years. How is it she's not subject? So they go through all these environmental struggles, mountaintop removing, which is creating a coal mine, not by digging a hole in the earth, but by taking the top off a mountain with uncountable, terrible environmental consequences. And they look at and mass industrial meat production and its consequences. And he watches her struggle, confront the bad guys, have her own tears when things are sad, have her own anger when things are totally unjust. But she's a happy person. How is she doing it? So that's the major theme of the novel.
Wow, interesting. I've read your profile and a little bit of your bio, and you're very, very accomplished with a whole lot of matters that you could really talk about. And I wish I had the time to just go into all of it, but this you can give me a day's podcast. But what I want to do is just focus maybe a little bit on the current things that you're doing, and this is that book I assume that you just mentioned that called The Sacrifice Zone.
Right.
Why did you use that as a title of your novel? And maybe you said a little bit about it. I just missed it. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Look at it this way. You get up in the morning, you do whatever you do. I do yoga every morning, and then I have my breakfast, and then I look at my email. And because I am an environmental philosopher, an environmental person, environmental religious studies of environment, I get my, the inbox that we all get these days. It used to be a physical piece of paper, right? Remember, you look old enough to remember newspapers?
Oh, yeah, sure.
But now it's all on the screen or on the phone. And I get from GRIST, which is a wonderful environmental news service, from all the environmental organizations to which I give a few dollars per year, from the BBC, from the New York Times, from CNN, all the terrible things that are happening. Now, there are lots of other terrible things. I mean, the war between Israel and Hamas, Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of deaths in Darfur, less dramatic, but terrible things of racism and sexism and so forth. But look, underlying all of human life is the natural environment in which we live. There are 5 to 10 million environmental refugees every single year because the places they live in have become uninhabitable. The agriculture doesn't work anymore. You think what all the refugees from Africa have done to the European politics, what they're doing to American politics, right? Terrible consequences. Central America is becoming uninhabitable, except for heroin gangs. So if you look at these things, if you confront them directly, what happens to your mind? What happens to your heart?
Okay.
What happens to any sense of the spiritual value of nature? The nature as a source of spiritual inspiration is thousands of years old. It's in every major religion, and it's in people who are spiritual and not religious. What happens when you go out to the forest and instead of feeling the smell of the trees, the amount of life that surrounds you there, the clouds in the sky, the sunlight, what you see is dying tree after dying tree after dying tree? Because with global warming, the living cycle of the pine bark beetle is much longer. They have much longer and fewer of them die in the winters because the winters aren't as severe. And you get 1 million trees a day dying.
Okay. I
It's
hear
upon
you.
thousands of acres of trees in the American Rockies. Last time I was out there, I was at the Glacier National Park, which is stupendous. It's incredible. I mean, the national parks are really magnificent. And there were whole huge hillsides, dead trees, not from a fire, which is another thing with drought and so forth, but from the pine bark beetle. What happens to our spiritual connection to these things?
Okay, now is that why you're calling it sacrifice?
That's right. Sacrifice.
Okay.
It's finished.
I got you. Okay.
There are places that are just too dirty, too polluted. The area around one of the nuclear labs, Livermore Labs, California, it's a sacrifice zone.
All right.
And maybe you'll get huge amounts of money, but vast amounts of money clean up, but often you don't.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you now. I was a little concerned about the title, but I got it. I hear you well. Being a academician and somebody who teaches philosophy, I'm curious as to why you turn to writing fiction. Most people who are in your area, and I must admit, I've only written 3 books, but all of them are kind of nonfiction. I can't put my head around the fiction to get these characters right, but you've done it. Why does an academic philosopher turn to writing fiction? Tell us a little bit about that. I'm
Well,
curious.
I think it's clear to me, though not to everybody else, that
Mm-hmm.
every philosophical position is held by a living human being.
Okay.
The rocks and the squirrels are too busy being rocks and squirrels to bother with philosophy. Every human being is both a particular individual who has their own physical experience, their own family experience, their own social experience, and also somebody who's part of a particular culture, a particular race, gender, all the different things,
Mm-hmm.
ways of social identities that we carry. So I think it makes the philosophical positions more alive if they're embodied in people with actual biographies, and you see how the philosophical position and the daily experience interact. Also, do keep in mind, though it's a small minority, it's not unknown for very famous philosophers to write fiction. Jean-Paul Sartre,
Mm-hmm.
S-A-R-T-R-E, great French philosopher, one of the greats of the tradition of existentialism, wrote huge, kind of boring, a lot of them, books of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
He also wrote several novels and some very powerful plays. Kierkegaard, who was one of my teachers, the earliest existentialist, wrote nonfiction, but he had a book called Either Or, and one of the entries, a very large book, was a fictional piece called Diary of a Seducer.
Mm.
So
Okay.
it's not unknown for this to happen. Even the earliest Western philosophy, the Platonic dialogues, they're dialogues with characters talking. Now, most of the time, you don't get much of the personality, but you get the sense of conflicting voices. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a novel, or like in my short story collection, you have people who are living out these different philosophical positions. And that, I
Okay.
think, brings it home to the reader that as the people in the novel are living it out, so they are living it out.
Okay. It's interesting. You have some very interesting characters. It seems like you have come up with them, and I'm kind of curious as to their character. And maybe that's the way I want to put it.
Let's take
I know what's that? There's Daniel.
Daniel.
There's Sarah.
Right.
Okay, now, so you said that the character of Sarah in the sacrifice zone is an environmental saint.
Right.
So what what in heaven's name does that mean? Because listeners want to know all this stuff. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, Sarah is who I am for, a really good 10 minutes every once in a while.
Okay, okay,
She's what I
all
would
right,
be if I were an environmental saint, because she's totally committed to the cause. She's spending
okay.
her whole adult life. She is, as she says, she has relationships with men, occasionally with women, but they don't last because really she's married to the earth and defending the earth and enjoying the earth. And she can walk past a pond and just see for the moment the sunlight reflected off a seagull, like a flash of light. And it gives her this great joy. And then she can go to her office and look at the inbox of all the terrible things that are happening and work with people about all the terrible things that are happening. And it hasn't severed her connection. And Daniel, who's more depressed and uptight, even though he's committed, Daniel's more like me, right? And sort of middle-aged Jewish uptight. I'm not
Uh-huh.
middle-aged anymore unless I'm going to live to be 155. Um, uh, Daniel doesn't see how she can do it, and she tells him, "Look, suppose, God forbid, your mother was in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't look good, the nurses say. Better get her affairs in order. Would you want to spend all your time just being miserable?
Mm.
Would you want to spend all your energy just thinking, oh, this can't be, it's got to work out? Or would you want to spend your energy in the hospital room with her, hold her hand, stroke her hair, sing to her, tell her how much you love her? Whatever the future is going to hold, you can still give love today.
Mm.
And that
Mm.
love might be to a person, it might be a river, it might be
Okay.
about chemicals in the bloodstream. The second, slightly minor theme of the book is heroin addiction. What happens to a family when somebody in the family is a heroin addict? Terrible things happen, and the character named Anne, she can't handle it anymore. That's too destructive to her family, and she retreats into Buddhist meditation. She retreats so much and does so many thousands of hours of meditation that she becomes herself a well-respected Buddhist teacher. But somewhere along the line, she realized that she's repressed. She hasn't just opened up and become, enlightened. She's repressed her feelings, and the feelings start to surface. And she has to go back and reestablish a relationship with her sister, whom she totally abandoned in her addiction. And she has to realize that there's nothing wrong with pain. There's nothing wrong with wanting. And she's tremendously grateful to the Buddhist meditation, because otherwise she would have gone nuts. She would have just collapsed and, just huddled in her room for the rest of her life. But she has to move beyond meditation as an escape, because her sister also seemed to be a sacrifice zone. Her family was a sacrifice zone. It was too polluted by the effects of addiction to be cleaned up. And so she retreated into Buddhist meditation, which is nothing wrong with retreating, but there's a higher level beyond retreat, which is to be able to experience the suffering without having that suffering defeat you. And that goes for the little microcosm of a family destroyed by addiction, and it goes for the macrocosm of the entire earth being tremendously polluted by the way we live.
Okay, Dr. Gottlief, you really led me right to where I want to go. This is very interesting. I must admit, I've not been a real fan of reading a lot of fiction. I do read a lot of nonfiction books, but you really excited me today.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to have to look at this book. This is very, very, very interesting. Let me ask you this, because you've kind of led me into it. What would you say that would give some encouraging and inspiring and maybe transforming, that could be very transforming to someone who is in the sacrifice zone? I know you didn't expect that, but okay, that's in the sacrifice zone.
Okay, so I'd say a number of things. First of all, when you tell yourself that it's too much to know what's going on, you're conditioning yourself to a sense of total vulnerability, total weakness. When you gather your courage and face the reality, yes, there may be tears, there may be rage, but you can stop telling yourself that you're too weak to face it. Climate change, pollution, terrible noise in the inner city. I mean, just noise pollution has terrible effects on people in the inner city that had diabetes, heart conditions, all these things. Just the noise condition, never mind what you're breathing in the air. So if you can face it, that's number one. Number two, as you face it, you can do something. There's everywhere you live, there are people concerned with the environmental crisis. Everywhere you live. And you can do something. Is it going to win? We don't know. Another thing you can do is feel a simple, but I think very true, gratitude. Everything we love is the product of countless factors way beyond human creation or control. The planet Earth, the water, the oxygen in the air, untold species over hundreds of millions of years evolving, a lot of them dying, passing around, so that there could be human beings. Our own bodies, which sometimes work better, sometimes work worse. I'm 77. It's not what it used to be. Thank God I can still hear and talk to you. So the digestive system, the fact if you cut your finger, it heals. How does that happen? You didn't do it with your mind, your conscious mind. You didn't talk it to happening. The fact that you can record memories. The fact that it ever was a world with trees and sparrows and newborn babies and dogs and colors. Didn't have to have colors. A world with orgasms. Didn't have to have orgasms. All this has given to us. Not because we're such wonderful people, but because it's just there. Oh my goodness, what a thing to be grateful for.
Wow, I hear you. This is awesome. Listeners, hang with us, because we got a couple more questions that we want to pose and have Dr. Gottlief kind of share with us. But first of all, let me ask you, Dr. Gottlief, if someone wants to know more about you're very interesting character, done a lot, want to check some of your books out. Tell us a little bit about how they can contact you.
Well, it's not simple. I have a website, rogersgottlieb.com, www.rogersgottlieb.com. There's contact information there. If you just, even if you don't get to my website, if you just put my name, Roger S. Gottlieb, in Google, all sorts of stuff comes out. There are several long lectures on YouTube. There are, I don't know, a dozen or 24 essays that are easily available. They're just there on Google. They're linked in my website. So I'm not hard to find. If you just go to Amazon and put in Roger S. Gottlieb, you'll see my 21 books.
Okay, great.
So I'm around.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
not hard to find.
Okay.
Tell the FBI I'm easy to find.
I love it. Okay. All right, listeners, I hope you got that. This is a very accomplished and very interesting individual guest that I'm talking to today, and I'm very excited to have him. Dr. Gala, let me ask you this. Given all that you've studied about environmental problems, do you see any way out? And does the novel that you talked about, The Sacrifice Zone, soon offer any hope?
It doesn't offer hope. I don't think I can really rationally offer hope. What I would try to offer, what I would try to do for encouraging, inspiring, and transforming, as your shirt says, is offer courage.
Okay.
There are models of people in human history. I mean, one of the models I used in a much earlier book was people who fought back in the Warsaw Ghetto, were totally outnumbered. 90% of the Jews had already been deported to concentration camps. The Jews were not trained militarily and had a pathetic few weapons, and yet they resisted the final push of the Nazis longer than Czechoslovakia and Poland, a handful of Jews in the ghetto. There are other examples. I could go to the American Civil Rights Movement. Unarmed Black people standing on bridges, marching in the streets, knowing that they could be shot, their churches could be bombed, their houses could be burned. These are people who fought back not knowing. I mean, you can look back at the civil rights movement and say, oh, well, it's great, worked out fine, a few deaths here and there, but we got the various federal civil rights movements. 10, 15 years later, there were Blacks running for office in Mississippi and getting elected in cities. But the people who were engaged in it, they didn't know what was going to happen. They were just putting their lives out there because they were resisting. So what I would like to offer is people, yes, you can resist. And while it will be difficult sometimes and frustrating, and working with other people is always a pain in the neck, right? But you will feel better because you won't be cowering in the corner. And emotionally and spiritually cowering in the corner, not a great way to live. You can obliterate your fear for the future, but that process of obliteration just wreaks havoc with your soul, with your emotions, with who you are.
Well said. Well said. I hear you. This is awesome. I'm just thrilled to have you share with listeners today. This is powerful. Something I want to ask is, you're talking about this sacrifice zone, and you kind of, you shared in a way of talking about the environmental, or the environment rather. And I want to know, why do you have a whole separate theme, even when you're dealing with the environmental activism? Why do you have a separate theme that's going to talk about opiate addiction?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Very good question.
What's the connection?
Well, a couple of connections. One connection is that drug addiction of all kinds is another kind of pollution.
Okay.
The effects of this pollution are terrible physical effects, to the addict, terrible psychological effects, terrible moral effects. And it's raging in America, it's raging throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, just like the environmental crisis, the people who are fueling this are making unbelievable amounts of money. From Exxon on the one hand to the cartel gangs on the other, people are making money polluting the earth.
Okay.
Number
Okay.
three, if you look at the causes of the environmental crisis, well, part of it is just the fact of money, incredible amounts of money, selling all this crap to people not being careful, and certain kind of short-term pleasures or conveniences that we have. Drive your pickup truck, eat the steak, animal food, all this kinds of stuff, all of which is terribly polluting.
Mm.
So that's one dimension of it. But the other dimension of it, that it's a kind of sickness.
Okay.
You think of the richest people, the people who ran, Exxon knew 30 years ago that there was climate issues. They had a sort of secret email exchanges. They told their own facilities on the coast, look out, the seas are going to rise, so you better build your facilities like this. And they actually hired a public relations firm to cast doubt on the reality of global warming. And footnote, it was the same public relations firm that the tobacco growers and the cigarette manufacturers hired to cast doubt on the relation between cigarettes and smoking.
Mm.
So you have that, but you also have a kind of insanity. The very rich are going to live in a world that's going to be drastically, you can't begin to believe how drastic the effect is going to be. Do they not know that their children and grandchildren are going to be affected? Do they really think their gated communities and their private guards and all this kind of stuff is going to protect them? Well, it won't. So it's a kind of compulsion. So one of the causes of the environmental crisis is a kind of compulsive addiction to money and then big business and this kind of thing, just like the individual heroin addict feels a compulsion to the next fix.
Wow. Dr. Gottlief, we could go on and on for a while. You're so accomplished, all of the awards that you have received and the media that has paid attention to you. I'm just excited. I'm just, all I can say, you're very intriguing. And so I just want to say to listeners of this podcast that if you want to know more about Dr. Gottlief, just please go to his website and check his books out. And I am certain if you are interested in the environment at all, you can't help but just enjoy listening to what he has to say. Dr. Gottlief, I tell you, what a pleasure. Is there anything else that you just want to, that's burning in your heart to say that I haven't asked you? Because I want to give you the opportunity to say it.
Many things seem and really are very important. Racial struggles, the violence against women, the horrible, the rise of anti-Semitism. But look, folks, without air, water, and some kind of purified environment, none of that will matter. None of that will matter. We're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're having fist fights over who gets the most comfortable chair on the Titanic. The boat's going down. Maybe we have 20, 30, 40 years to turn it around, if we're lucky. So let's stop ignoring this thing. Let's turn all our attention to it. You know, when America was attacked on Pearl Harbor, we turned all our attention to it. When these level of things happen, everybody's affected. Poor people, black people are affected more than white and rich people, but everybody's affected. There will be no escape unless we make fundamental changes in the way we live.
And there you have it. Dr. Roger Gotlief coming and sharing with us today. It has been a pleasure and a joy having you share with us. And until next time, peace and blessings to each of you.